Hello, I'm Hugh Aljoe with the Noble Research Institute. First, I want to thank the American Angus Association for asking me to present this presentation about grazing management strategies. And particularly, how do we provide these grazing management strategies to regenerate our pastures and our soil health? Now, I'm the Director of Producer Relations at Noble. I'm also a pasture and range consultant. Prior to that, I ran a pretty large ranch in Texas in which we ran about 1,400 mother cows on Bermuda grass type pastures using these same practices and principles into this intensive high stock density type grazing in order to effectively run these operations so that they became more profitable and more productive over the years. Now, that's what I want to share with you today, and that's what we'll get started on grazing management strategies, regenerating the pastures, and soil health. The number one rule of grazing management is actively manage the stocking rate at or below carrying capacity. What this does is maintain a measure of flexibility within our operation. Stocking rate and carrying capacity are two terms that are often used interchangeably, but have two completely different meanings. Stocking rate is a measure of forage demand, the number of animals that are out there grazing, whether it's from a season or throughout the year, but it's the amount of forage demand that you place on the ranch based on the amount that they're going to graze, which is about 3% of the body weight daily. Now, carrying capacity, on the other hand, is the amount of forage supply that's being grown within the property. That means that as you advance from season to season, year to year, carrying capacity changes, and oftentimes our stocking rate, we don't change that. What we really want to do is work in complement between the two, have our stocking rate where it works in complement with the carrying capacity depending on the amount of forage supply that's out there at any given time. Now you ask yourself, well, we've got a lot of variability in our rainfall. And this is just a chart for northeast Kansas, for that region, and you can see that over the last 100 and something years that we have rainfall that fluctuates considerably from year to year, and then we have these dry trends, and then you got these wet trends, and ultimately, how do you manage for average year? Well, most people, that's where they want to set it, is for about an average year. But even that, just philosophically thinking about it, doing so, you're overstocked 1 and 2 years, half the time. And I know for a fact that usually for every year that you're overstocked, it takes about 2 years to recover. So you're already behind. So we've got to adjust our management just a little bit. Now, if we set our stocking rate for about a 90% of the average rainfall, we're only overstocked 1 in 3 years. We take that to 80% of average rainfall, we're overstocked about 1 in 6 years. Even a novice can get by pretty good in 1 in 6 years with this type of management. And what that does is provide that little bit of flexibility so that if you're doing a really good job with your breeding program, a good job with your nutrition program, and you like the livestock that you have, you can carry your own calf crop, as an example, later into the season instead of marketing them all at weaning, carrying them on up past 60 days or even longer in order to find a better economic marketing opportunity. When you do that, you just added value to something you've already put your investment in. In essence, you're getting 2 incomes from 1 calf crop. You've got to return back to the cow-calf unit with the weaned calf value, and then you've got that stocker calf that over 60 days or longer has added value to your operation. When you do that, more times than not, there's going to be more value back to the stocker phase, net margin, that is, than what you would have had net margin back to the cow-calf phase. Our experiences have shown time and again, just this little bit of management in our stocking rate relative to our carrying capacity over the years has provided many an opportunity for producers to go from breaking even or being a little under from year to year to where they're actually having a profitable operation year in and year out. For every month of hay feeding over plan or extended hustling, and what I mean is that when you go into the winter, what are you planning to have enough hay for to get through your feeding season? Or how many months do you make the cows eat more than just the leaf material that's out there? When do you want them to start cleaning up the pastures? That's what I call hustling. Whenever you're doing that for a month at a time, you're overstocked by 8.3%. 8.3% is 1/12, 1 month out of 12 for the year. So, but without me ever having to be out on your operation, if you can tell me how many months that you're actually intended to feed, oftentimes 2 to 3 months is what I hear. And when you actually add it up and you started feeding in November, finish in April, you're closer to 5 months. And in that example, you're already at least 2 months overstocked, so at least 15 to 20%. So do this little test yourself. See where you're at relative to what you have planned, and are those months that you make those cattle hustle just a little longer than what they probably would like to. So how do we begin to look at this in the long term? We really need to be monitoring our stocking rate and carrying capacity simultaneously. Again, they're two different metrics, but we need to be looking at our grazing or reserve herd days. We just need to track them every day or every time you move the pasture. How many animals were in it? What was their size and weight? We can put that onto into a chart and actually tabulate that over a period of time. If we're doing a really good job of management, in the good years, we ought to see our grazing days or herd days per pasture increase. And over time, as we do a better job of our management, we'll see that operationally we'll increase our number of grazing and herd days throughout the year. Now, reserve herd days is a little bit different. Reserve herd days is an estimate of future use, future forage production that you can use later. So what we really want to do is starting there in the spring of the year, typically the first part of the June, as you transition from June to July and August, start picturing in your pastures ahead of you, how many days could your existing herds or herd be able to graze if the pastures did not grow another inch of grass. In doing so, you can estimate the number of reserve herd days in front of you at any given time. As you go through the spring and early summer, you should see the number of herd days increase well above what you're actually taking. And then what you'll see that as you begin to get into the latter part of the year, you'll begin to eat into your reserve herd days. The total value should be coming down. And then at frost, what we ought to be able to see is that you ought to have enough reserve herd days to get you from frost into the spring, and preferably about 30 days into the spring, so that you know that you have your stocking rate just about where it needs to be. Now, that reserve herd days also includes any type of reserve forage that you had in hay as well. So keep that in mind. That's the first step. Next thing we want to talk about is extending the grazing season. As one of our strategies, we want to be sure that we pay attention to what I call rule number 2. Make good and proper use of your existing forages. We're not going out there trying to change what you've already got. We first need to make good use of what exists. And then, and only then, cost effectively fill forage gaps of quantity and quality. Now, the simple solution right off the top is just to say, well, let's just purchase or add hay. But when we do this, we also know that it can be extremely expensive, especially in these years when hay's in short supply. It becomes extremely expensive. So this is not always the best solution. What we'd really like to be able to do is bridge forage gaps and let the cows do the work. It is easier to move the cows to the grass than grass to the cows. We've got to keep that in our mindset for as many days as we can throughout the year. We want the cattle doing the work. Let them do the graze, let them do the harvesting, and only in those periods, and hopefully it's just short periods of time, do we want to fill it with hay or something, some sort of stored forage. Now, as we said, the more cost-effective solution is to extend the grazing season. What we want to be able to do is make good use of the existing forages and then manage using what I use intentional grazing allocations. When you feed hay for the winter, you don't turn the cattle into the whole hay lot and let them have it all at one time. We can be a lot more effective if we give them allocations for a day, several days, a week at a time, and then we're more efficient not only with our land resource, we're also managing those allocations further into the year. And this is a cost-effective way to extend the grazing season. Now, first, as we said, make good use of your perennial forages. We can stockpile some of these as we get into the latter part of the year. Let's say that we get in through the spring and summer, we've made a good grazing on all those pastures, but then we want to identify some of those pastures that we can allocate to scroll from usually about end of August, 1st September, all the way to frost. In doing so, we call that stockpile. And then when we do that, we want to feed it like hay. So when we put the cattle in there to graze it, we want to allocate a day or 2 days worth of grazing at a time to efficiently utilize what we have stored as standing hay. Now, both native pastures or introduced pastures we can do that with, whether it's cool season or warm season. It just make good use of what you have each year. Now, what you'd like to do is ideally rotate that around between your pastures. Try not to use the same pastures to stockpile every year so that we encourage our soil health over the long term. We're also going to bridge these forage gaps using annuals and cover crops, both cool season and warm season. It all depends on what's the need that you have, and within your environment, how do you make the most use of it? Now, whenever you're planting annuals and cover crops, you've got an annual expense. So when you do that, you want to use those efficiently. So limit grazing is a viable strategy. So when we do this, we want to be sure that we're making efficient use of those in the periods of time that we need to. And when we're trying to have cattle that are growing livestock, we want to give them as much access to it as they can, but we've got to always manage the pasture themselves. For mature animals, we're trying to allocate that to the point that we can extend it as long as possible. Therefore, the limit grazing works really, really well when they can graze for about an hour, hour and a half, and get all the nutrients they need as a supplement from these annuals or cover crops, and then go back to a perennial pasture for the rest of the day. Now, this is just an example that we use here in southern Oklahoma within a Bermuda grass system, where the green represents what would be the normal growth curve throughout the season. That purple line is the forage accumulation and disappearance under grazing management. And you can see that I've already identified within a typical production system, we have two areas of quantity that are way below the needs of the livestock. And then we got a little bit of quality as well. And you can just look at this little example right here. If I've got growing livestock, those annuals come in handy. But in this example, let's say that we've got a cow-calf operation. I'm trying to fill at the end of the year, end of the growing season, and going into the spring season, how do I extend my grazing season? So I'm looking for forages that can complement that. In this example here, I've used ryegrass to fill the spring, add me a couple more months. Here I've stockpiled some of my Bermuda grass by grazing it through the growing season and then pulling off, and sometime in about September, stockpile it, and then I'm grazing it on a daily or every other day basis, making these little moves and extending that all the way out, hopefully into the new year. And for those little periods of time that I still have a little bit of need for some forage, I can backfill with hay. 2 months worth of hay versus 4 months worth of hay means a lot to your bottom line. And then those of you that may be in areas where you have some crop residuals, you can bring in or you can take the cattle to these things like corn stalks and these crop residuals and fill in some of these forage gaps very economically and let the cattle do the harvest. So it minimizes the amount of reliance that you have on hay in many examples. So this is just an example of how we want to bridge those forage gaps. As I've been talking about, going down to those daily or these daily allocations or these allocations over for a couple of days, we really begin into the area what I call regenerative grazing management. And in particularly, how do we do this to improve our soil health? This is where we get to rule number 3. Plan and graze adaptively. And for me, that really means this regenerative grazing management. How do we manage our pastures and our grazing such that we continue to improve the pasture health, vigor, resiliency, and the soil health over the long term? Well, there's all sorts of systems, and when people think about grazing strategies, they tend to think about systems, and it's different. Some of the key systems that we see is continuous. The only thing that you're really managing or out there to manage in a continuous is stocking rate. When we move into these rest rotations or high intensity, low frequency type of systems, that's just another rest rotation. We're managing recovery and rest and stocking rate, but we're really not managing the grazing. Then we get into these right here. These are where we begin to manage the grazing, the rest and recovery, as well as the stocking rate actively. Now, there's a lot of terms, there are different ones that are thrown out there, but they all have the same philosophy. We're managing stocking rate, managing the rest and recovery, and we're managing the grazing events themselves. So let's look at this a little more intensely. So the grazing variables that we really manage in any type of these adaptive grazing or regenerative grazing management strategies are timing, frequency, intensity, and duration. It's through these strategies are formed. It's the application of these variables in which we find our strategies. And it changes from season to season, and it can change from year to year. And when we're doing this, we're beginning to use a tool that we call stock density to help really rebuild our soils and our pastures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's look at each of these, starting with timing. When we're really talking about timing, we're talking about the season of use and the stage of maturity within a pasture. You can see in this examples right here, we've got one example where we've got it lush green grass in the spring and the other one during the dormant season. Different seasons of use, different stages of maturity, so how we graze it makes a big difference, and how we grazed it this year isn't the way we would prefer to graze it next year. We need to always try to alter that to some degree. In the spring, we want to graze the grass up. We want to make sure that as we're rotating through, that the cattle can graze the tops out of these pastures and let the pasture grow up to the point where we always have a lot of photosynthetic material, the leaf, out there available at all times. We want to attain peak growth and peak photosynthesis sometime during the growing season. And the best way to do that and get the most out of your pasture is to graze the grass up. And we'll tell you how to do that shortly. Frequency, we're really talking about recovery. We want to make sure that we have long recovery periods, long enough to allow for full recovery of the plants that have been grazed. Typically, we're thinking 60 to 120 days, but it can vary. It varies with seasons, so we've got to be thinking about that. You know, what season where we're in. If we've got good growing conditions, we can move more rapidly. If it's really dry, we've got to slow it way down. Again, as we said earlier, we want to make sure that we're attaining peak forage production before we initiate a grazing event, ideally. In the spring, you have to work with it a little bit, but after you get through the spring and get into the summer, that's what we should be doing. When we see full flush conditions is when we'd like to be able to come back in there and graze it. And this typically means we got to allow the grass, instead of being short when we graze it, be taller. So what we're looking at is phase 2 or early phase 3. Phase 3 is when plants begin to go reproductive. Now we know most of our perennial plants are going to want to go reproductive sometime during the year, especially after midsummer. So we've got to be managing that well as we begin to understand what are we trying to achieve with our grazing management on that when it comes to frequency. Intensity, what we'd like to do is to apply the take half, leave half rule. We want to leave ample residual so that the grass regrows rapidly. It's kind of like mowing your grass. You mow it real tall, you got to mow it every week. You mow it off short, it may be a while before you have to come back. Same thing with the grazing pastures. The taller it is when they leave the pasture during a grazing event, the more rapidly it'll recover. So in the spring, we like to graze the upper third and then rotate very rapidly so that we get full recovery through all those pastures. And if we can, try to hit all our pastures once in an ideal world. When we do that, when we top graze these plants send a signal to the crown of the plant itself. And what they do is say that we've just been grazed, we need to do something so that we can have more production. And so as they stimulate new growth, new tillers, new plants that come up there, we end up with more new leaf material and healthier and more vigorous plants. Instead of having 1 or 2 stems sticking up, now we have an abundance of them trying to regrow. But the key thing is to stimulate the tillering and new leaf production, we need to try to do that early in the growing season. Duration, this is the amount of time that the cattle are going to be in a particular pasture or paddock. You know, we'd like to have those periods to be relatively short. We want it to be 1 to 3 days preferred, because after about 3 days under good moisture conditions, the plants want to regrow. And when they start regrowing, that's when they're most susceptible to be rebidden and grazed again. So what we'd like to be able to do is move those cattle off before the plants really begin to grow and have enough there to be bidden a second time. So we got to have to vary, this varies with the growth rate. As you get further into the season, it becomes a little drier. It takes a little longer for the plants to really grow, but you're still looking at 3 to 5 days most of the time. Our whole thought in this type of grazing management, this adaptive grazing, is to prevent repeat grazing of these grazed plants during each grazing event. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're never going to be 100%, but that's what we're trying to strive toward. So again, you've got these variables that we're trying to manage to provide us our strategy, a grazing strategy to extend the grazing season and to improve our ranches. But what does it look like to put these grazing variables into a strategy and into practice? Well, what we really want to be doing is as we go into this growing season is trying to target to graze every one of these pastures, knowing that we're going to try to hit it somewhere right about here. Now, when we begin the growing season, all forages begin in phase 1, move into phase 2, and as we make that first rotation, we want to make sure that we're moving up this scale so that when we hit full flush, we're grazing all our pastures in this region. So in our adaptive grazing, for optimal use of these pastures and to optimize our soil health results, this is the area that we want to be grazing most of our pastures most of the year whenever we have good growing conditions. So that's what we're trying to strive toward. When we're optimizing our grazing, the thing that we got to think about is we're managing for residuals. You know, we understand water, rainfall is required to grow grass, but it also takes grass to grow grass. The more leaf area that we can actually keep intact with the plants themselves, the faster they're going to regrow. But it also covers the soil. It also provides other benefits to our soil health. So we need to make sure that when we're doing this our grazing, that our harvest efficiency is usually at 25 to 50% of the leaf area, not the whole plant, just the leaf area per grazing event. And then with these introduced pastures, we can take a little bit more, but we need to make sure that we have adequate residual, especially during good growing conditions, so that the plant can regrow as rapidly as possible. And the reason why, not only because we know that the plant begins to regrow after about 3 days, but when we take more than about 50% of the leaf area of the plant, the roots stop growing. When the roots stop growing, that means less nutrients, less water, less materials going into the plant for growth and rebuilding of the structures that are there. So if we can maintain that 30 to 40% grazing of the leaf area, we optimize not only the plant's ability to regrow new plant tissues, it also ensures that our root continues to grow, bring up nutrients as well as moisture following each grazing event. Now, what does it mean for recovery periods? That usually means during the active period, we're at somewhere between 30 to 40 days, depending on the type of perennial forages that you have, or less. Moderate growth when things begin to move into what I call the summer season, 40 to 60 days for introduced pastures, 60 to 90 on native range. And then when it really becomes drought type conditions, we should see our grazing events extending out 90 to 100 days, 120 days or more, depending on what that recovery is required. And some pastures, when you get far enough west where you have very limited rainfall, it may be 2 years before you get full recovery. Again, we need all the pastures to obtain that peak flush at some time during the growing season, and the further west you go, it may require an additional growing season. Just as a note, annual forages recover in periods, oftentimes less than 30 days, especially once we get them up and get them growing. When they begin to go reproductive, we can hit them a whole lot faster and a whole lot quicker because the recovery's there. So they're a lot easier to manage. It all depends what we're trying to achieve and then what are the forages that we have available to us. As we look at the number of paddocks as it applies to our grazing strategy, typically the more pastures or paddocks we have available in front of us, the more rest and recovery we actually find within those pastures. Here, example, we go up to 32. Paddocks where if everything was equal, all the pastures would be resting about 90% of the time. You subdivide those paddocks to 64, you jump up to almost 99%. That's when we really begin to have these regenerative properties begin to build within our pastures and our soils. Keep in mind, rest and recovery are not the same. Rest is just the time period between each grazing event. Recovery is the amount of that rest period that the plants are actively growing. You only get recovery if the plants are actively growing. So we need to make sure that we have full recovery, not just full rest, but full recovery once every growing season if possible. As we said, when we begin to use these adaptive principles, we really begin to affect our stock density. We're using the tool of stock density. What this happens, we see a decrease in selectivity. Animals will begin to graze a more diverse amount of plants out there, not just pick and choose their favorites. They also will create some herd impact. These areas where we want to knock down some of this forage. And when we begin knocking down this forage, it has other benefits as well. It feeds the soil biology at those higher stock densities, resetting overly mature pastures. If we get it down on the ground, there's other organisms that will act upon those, plant material and help break it down so that it'll contribute back to the nutrients and the soil cover for these pastures. And just to give you an example, what does this kind of look like? This here is 20 to 50,000 pounds per acre, depending on how small I want to make the pasture. Here we're moving cattle every 2 to 3 days and be able to take half of what's out there. 80 to 100,000 pounds in the top picture. We're moving almost daily. The next one is 150 to 250 pounds per acre. We're moving them multiple times a day. Here's between 500 and 1 million pounds. They're moving several times a day. The key thing that you saw in all these slides or these pictures is that there was always plenty of forage out there. That's the key. When we start using these high stock densities, we've got to make sure we have forage available to us to actually manage. And then we can move into what I call an area of ultra high stock density. This is something we want to apply very strategically. Typically when we've got peak forage production, or we've got these seasonal transitions, as you see in this picture, where we have a perennial pasture and it's been overseeded with a cool season cover crop, a lot of annuals in that, and we're laying it all down so that the Bermuda grass, which is underneath it, will grow back into it. It serves as a green manure crop. Or we can do this when we have these abundant, mature, dormant type forages using dry cows. We can knock it down and do a whole lot of good just to restart a overly dormant pasture. And we can also use this when we're growing and finishing cattle. If we're just letting these cattle take the top out of a pasture and moving them very rapidly, they're always going to get the best out of it every single move. So we can move these growing type cattle 3, 4, 5 times a day, allowing them to what I call cream the pastures, and then follow in with something like a more mature animal like the cows behind it, and we can finish or continue growing these growing type livestock a lot more effectively. But this is the other time that we would be using these. Now, I'm going to use this little word of caution. When you start this and you've never done this before, you really need to look at what I call a safe to learn approach. We want to know how, where, and when to use high stock density grazing and get started right. The how? Well, it all starts with using existing resources, some relatively inexpensive but get good materials, but electric fence supplies. Plus, we want to use our soil health principles as well as our grazing management. We want to make sure that we keep the soil covered. We're always want to be managing for extra residual. We want to make sure we're encouraging diversity and we're using livestock well. This is what we've been talking about up to this point. But apply all that as we know it to the where. The where is a location easy to manage well and observe grazing activities. This is the key thing, is when you're out there with these higher stock densities, you don't just turn them in and let them go. You've got to be watching. And what you'd really like to do is when you turn them in, you want to watch them for a while. You'd like to be able to come back on a frequent basis. So some place that would be right in front of your house, for example. Some place you're going to see it all the time, and you're also going to take really good care of it because all the neighbors are going to see it too. So this is where you really want to pay attention. It always helps if you've got a really good productive pasture, because they're also more forgiving to mistakes. You're going to make a mistake every once in a while, but those mistakes are small, they're short in nature, and they recover more rapidly than you might think. The when, you want to start when there's lots of forage. Remember the pictures we saw. We had lots of standing forage out there. And a plan. And now you don't have to do it just during the growing season. You can do it after frost, but you need a lot of forage out there and begin to do these daily allocations, or you can do it multiple times a day. But start with a daily allocation. Make sure that when you go in there, there's plenty of forage. When you leave out, there's plenty of forage. You want to be top grazing throughout that, unless it is in the dormant season. You might take a little bit more. But either way, you're going to learn to adjust your eye and calibrate the livestock demand to your forage supply. It's a really good way to get started. And you don't have to do it all year long. Take an area, get started, learn, and then apply it into the future. And you can also expand it the next year or the next season. So just a really quick example, Coffee Ranch. This is one of our properties. It's about 2,500 acres. There in the front, we've got about a 60-acre introduced Bermuda grass field. And this is what it looks like. You've got these water tanks. We can put them, we subdivide these paddocks, and then we put in temporary fence, and we can take these cattle and let them graze what we wanted to in a day, 2-day time period. And you can see how that worked. Now the problem is that when you get a wet season, all the water's down here. So you can imagine what this could look like in those wet years. So what we did is we took this side right here where we had water and ran a water line along that road right here. This is what it looked like. We put in these quick connect watering system where we can take a hose, quick connect it to that water line, and then we have this portable water unit that we drag from along that road from connection to connection. Just a reminder, something to think about. Water infrastructure is often a very cost-effective capital expense. If you want to know where to start, fencing and water are the two areas in this regenerative grazing area that oftentimes pay for themselves in a very short period of time. That to be said, this is what it looks like now. We can take the cattle, move them in here in even more subdivisions, keep the fence moving in front of them, let the cattle come back in there. We don't put up a back fence to these because once they've grazed those areas and soiled them a little bit, they're not going to want to graze that. They're always grazing to that next fresh area. So then we just keep on moving, and then we move them to the next paddock. Now, another thing we can do, especially when they start calving, it's hard to keep those little calves sometime running with mother cows. We can just take that fence and let it go north and let the cows graze north a day, 2 days at a time, always allowing them to go back to get their calves. And once we get to that next water hydrant area and move the water, then we can move the fence up behind them and continue to do that across the entire area. So these are the different ways that you can apply this adaptive grazing using the high stock density and have the results that we're looking for and still use that safe to learn approach. Now, this is a quick example of what it looks like when you've got 300 head of stockers and they've been used to moving on a daily basis. They're going into what would be 2 to 4 acres at a time. And this is about as difficult as it gets to be. The fact is, when we start this type of approach, the livestock learn faster than we do. They know what's coming up, and you can see that they all move through. They come into the next area, and especially with these stalker cattle, if you get an animal that's drifting or holding back there at the back of the herd, that might be an animal that needs attention. So we can move the whole herd through there, shut the gate behind them, and then that last one or two, we take them down that lane that you see right there. We can check them out and see if they need any medical attention. Because you can see back there in the back, we do have a few stragglers. Those are the ones that we're always trying to pay attention to. It aids in your livestock handling. We really like this high stock density grazing. So wrapping up, grazing strategies. What do we need to be thinking about? First off, we need to adjust stocking rate with changing carrying capacity. As carrying capacity changes from season to season, year to year, we need to make sure that we are relevant to the seasons. Adjust our stocking rates as we need to. If we do so, we will end up taking better care of our pastures and our soil health. We want to build flexibility in our stocking rates so that we have opportunities to take advantage of maybe retaining ownership of our own calf crop or bringing in something else that you might have an economic advantage over your neighbor who doesn't have the extra grass. So if you have a little extra grass, that flexibility can come in handy, especially when you start looking at your bottom line. Plan grazing activities and fill the gaps. We want to make sure we know our resources and fill those gaps using existing resources as best as possible. We want to graze regeneratively. In other words, we want to tackle our grazing strategies using this time-managed high stock density. It doesn't have to be the same all the time. In fact, it shouldn't be the same all the time. But try to use those to the extent that you can during the seasons that you have abundant grass. We want to minimize the time in a pasture and a paddock. We want to make sure that we're allocating their feed just like you would during the wintertime when you allocate hay or feed. You tend to do that on a daily or every other day basis. Same way here. We want to make sure that we're doing that with our pastures. We only want to graze the top portion of our leaves, top graze to the extent that we can, especially during the growing season and that active growing season. Only taking the upper half of the leaf area. Maintain plenty of residual. We want to make sure there's plenty of residual so that we may keep our roots actively growing so that our plants can grow and recover as rapidly as possible. We want to allow full recovery before regrazing in all the pastures at least once during the year, and preferably between every grazing event. These 7 items are the key strategies to regenerative or adaptive grazing. This is what we need to be thinking about when we think about what are the strategies of grazing management. These are the things we put together, packaged together to effectively positively impact not only the pastures themselves, but the soil health. To learn a little bit more about Noble, you can sign up for our Noble Rancher, which is a weekly digital newsletter. Also, you can follow us on social media and learn a little bit more of what we're doing on our own ranches. We have a little set of videos that are out called Regenerating the Ranch. It talks a little bit about some of the things that we're doing and we've experienced over the last year. I encourage you to check it out on our website. With that, I'm Hugh Aljoe. It's been a pleasure. If you need to contact me, these are my means to contact. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Wow, Hugh, that was a great presentation. My mind's kind of swimming a little bit because there was a lot of information there. So I hope I can process that. I'm sure a lot of the people there kind of feel the same way I do. But we do have some really good questions submitted already. Anyone who has additional questions, go ahead and continue throughout the question and answer to submit them through that Q&A button. And if we don't get through all the questions this evening, we will respond and make sure you get your question answered via email as well. And I just wanted to thank you. When you said it took 2 years to recover for each incident that was poor, I think I've overgrazed for 20 years, so that I've got a lifetime to get that recovered.
Well, you're not alone. You're not alone. So don't feel like you're singled out.
That's the first question we had, Hugh, was that I understand there's a particular stage the grass needs to reach before cows should graze it. Can you explain how to visually identify this stage?
Yes, sir. And if I had a plant here or a large enough plant, it'd be even easier to discuss. As a plant grows, they typically grow in what we call tillers. That's a single plant unit that's coming from the base of the plant. And if you look at that base of that plant, what we'd like to see is at least 3 mature leaves on the plant before we graze it. Now, we'd prefer it to be 4 or 5, but we want those plants to have completely grown out from the base of the plant or the stem of the plant if you get a little bit further into the reproductive stage, and it'll form what we call a collar or ligule, which separates the bottom part of the leaf, what we call the sheath, from the leaf plant or the true leaf material, the blade. And we'd like to have at least three mature leaves before we graze, whether it's a perennial or an annual at any given time.
We have several questions too, kind of focused on getting started. And the one would be kind of, where can I find information on what my estimated stocking rate should be when I'm getting started?
Well, the estimated stocking rate is really difficult to come by, and there's all different rules of thumb depending on where you're at. But what I usually do for producers, that work with us, is we'll use the web soil survey, go into what we call the suitability units, and look under the vegetative forage production. If you're native range, it'll give you a range in production for a normal year, an unfavorable year, and a favorable year. Okay. Now, it's for what would typically be good range condition. So, they've got exact numbers in there that are not exact when you come to application. So you have to keep that in mind. Right. Then if you have introduced pasture, oftentimes what we find is the crops are under the crop component. It'll have you a crop component, and it'll list the grazing crops in addition to your commodity crops. So if you look under there, if it's a grazing crop like Bermuda grass, it'll be listed as in, instead of pounds of production like it is with native grass, it will be in animal unit months. To give you about the estimate on that, multiply it by 800. You're going to get pretty close to the number of pounds of production. And that's also assuming under good management. It doesn't ever say how much fertility, how much nutrients in there, but under good management, that's what it would apply. That's where we go to get started. And then we have to begin to work it based on the context that we see within any type of ranch, wherever they're located.
Well, kind of along those lines, are there a place to go to get estimated when you're trying to figure your stocking intensity when you're at the beginning of this process? I think some of these questions kind of indicate everyone's excited, but it's a little hard finding the information in that initial process.
It really is sort of difficult to know what you have out there. Now, again, it's back to rules of thumb. We know that in let's say you're in a 35-inch rainfall. That's about what we are here in central Oklahoma, south central Oklahoma. At 35-inch rainfall, under introduced pasture conditions, we expect to see, somewhere between, in really good, say good fertility, you could have 300 pounds per acre inch of growth. So for every inch, you could have about 300 pounds of dry matter. Now, if it's not fertilized very well, or if you've got a pretty thin pasture, it may be closer to 100 pounds. So you kind of keep that in mind. Native pastures are even less than that. Typically what we see is 100, really good native range condition in this part of the country. In tall grass prairie, it may be pushing close to 200, but oftentimes it'll be less than that. So per acre inch, that's sort of a place to start. Now, if you put the cattle into a smaller enclosure, several acres, and what you can do is back figure. So if you go in there and the average plant height across there is 12 inches, and you've got 100 cows out there, 100 cows are going to eat about 30 pounds per cow per day. So if you got 100 cows in a day, that's what, 3,000 pounds of production. Is that right?
Yeah.
30 times, 3,000 pounds of production.
Yep.
So if they took from 12 inches down to 8 inches in one day, they've taken so much per acre inch. You just divide that from 12 down to 8, that's 4 inches, 4 divided by our 3,000. That puts us at somewhere about 750 pounds per acre inch, which is unrealistic, but that's how you would calculate it.
We have another question here on how do you decide when and what to supplement throughout the time when the cows are on grass?
That's another good question. There's different ways that you can do that. One of the easiest ways to get started is when you start going into the dormant season is to test the quality of the forage that you're expecting the livestock to eat, just like you would hay. And you'd go out there and you would graze. How a cow will graze standing grass. They've got a tongue that goes out there and just kind of pulls. Just take your 2 fingers and go out there and just grab the forage, pull it off at about the height that you expect them to graze, and analyze just that portion. They'll give you an idea about the forage quality. Now, what we have found is when we go to these daily moves, and if it's been grazed during the growing season, the new growth that's grown, as we call that stockpile, is going to be of enough quality to keep most dry cows going most of the year, at least in this part of the country. But when they do that on a daily basis, they're getting high quality and at the top of the plants, the leaf area, and then they're going to get some of the quality that's lesser in the middle part of the plant. What we're trying to do on a daily basis is you've got a good mix within their stomach so they don't require as much supplement. Whereas if you go into a pasture and they graze the first week, they graze the top part of it, the next they graze the middle part, next they graze the bottom, their nutrition is changing from the time they enter that pasture to the time that they leave. And you should be supplementing on an increasing amount throughout that period, and none of us do that. one of the key things that we watch on is in our grazing is look at the livestock manure. If you begin to look at the manure and it's, if it hits the ground and it makes a nice firm plat like it would a pancake butter, you're about where it needs to be. If it begins to stack up a little bit, they could use a little extra quality in their supplementation. If it's, on the other hand, becomes a little bit too liquid, they actually need some dry material in order to help distribute that protein that they're actually getting, like we see this time of year down here when we're getting some spring flush.
Well, kind of along those lines, do you recommend dedicating a pasture just for annual forages or overseeding existing pastures then?
It all depends. It's I'd make a good economist sometimes.
Yeah.
But as you if you've got growing livestock, or in cases where that you need high quality forages, or you could use it as a supplement, that extra high quality forage is one of those things. If you can cost effectively make it work, it really does a whole, it can do you a whole lot of good if you can make it, pencil out. The part that we do see down here in this part of the country on these introduced pastures, one of the things we're trying to manage for is greater diversity. And when you've been managing a monoculture of Bermuda grass, what do you have? Well, a monoculture of Bermuda grass. There is no diversity. And so what we're doing is going through the cool season and adding cover crops, a mixture, or at least try to get some of the cool season small grains mixed in with some legumes, maybe some other brassica type forages, depending on what we've got, to add some extra diversity so that we can get a lot more of our soil health characteristics beginning to be expressed, within the soil. But we've got to start with some diversity, and that's the easiest place to start. The other thing we do is we're not using herbicide, so you're going to get a lot of diversity at some things, and a lot of things you really didn't want. But what we're finding when we put these cattle into these higher stock densities, they don't seem to mind all those weeds or these forbs that are growing up there naturally as we thought they were. Now, they may not graze them the first rotation, but you may find later in the season, they come in there and they take them really well, because those weeds, these forbs, their crude protein is typically, even when they're in a mature stage, at 25 to 30% crude protein. In the middle of the summer, that's really good when you've got something like a warm season grass. So they're really a good complement. Sometimes the livestock just have to learn to use them.
I got to admit, I'm surprised you're saying that weeds are a good thing at times.
Well, yeah. It's all if you can make use of them, they're really good.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, and this question, I think a lot of people struggle with, and I know we did. When feeding hay, how do you manage the waste hay and the damage that you get from some of these high traffic areas? And kind of following up to there, to minimize or eliminate the weed and unwanted plant growth that you get in those areas. Okay,
well, there's a lot of questions that are packaged into that. If we just start with, when we start feeding our hay, ideally what we'd like to do is be able to distribute that over different locations. So the first, thought that goes in my mind, what are my pastures that could really benefit from the extra manure, the extra hay, what's the waste that I might have? Which pastures would benefit the most? So your lower quality pastures, that's where you start. And you try to distribute that out to where you can spread that across the pasture, so you get more uniform nutrient delivery across the pasture. And then when it begins to recover in the spring, it'll sort of take care of itself. Now, you get these wet years, and we have not had a wet year down here in the South, but you get a wet year and you get these areas that get loaded. Then what we probably do is then begin to identify what are the areas that we may have to sacrifice in the short term, knowing that it's not really what we want to be able to do, but in those periods that are really wet, we're going to go in there. We're going to keep those animals there for as long as we can. And then we're going to may have to either renovate, add some, seed into some other crops, annual crops, in order to get, some rejuvenation back to those areas, and let that area be as small as possible, that footprint there, so that you can manage it more intensely. Now, when you start calving in those type situations, you want to try to get them out. You'd really rather try to have a fresh pasture to start over. But, all this is part of the juggling game, part of the management that you have to plan ahead. And I think that's a part of it where we have found that if we manage for these stockpiled areas to where we don't have to rely on the hay, graze longer into the winter season, we tend to come out a whole lot better with fewer of these problems. And if you have a lot of this, depending on, you get up in the northern part of the country, you're gonna, it can be a whole different story. But down in our part of the country, if you're having much trouble with that, you're probably a pretty good indication you're stocked a little heavier than you should be.
Well, this next question from a producer is, I have wheat pasture that I'm about to intensively graze. How do you suggest I graze knowing I will plant summer annuals afterwards? And he would prefer to use animal impact only and not chemicals.
Okay. I tell you what we're doing ourselves, and you may have to adapt it to your own situation, because I'm not saying that you won't or wouldn't need to use something to burn down. But what we're trying to do is go in there and with a high stock density graze is make that first pass, trying to get as much as we can, and then knowing that you're going to get some regrowth. Do I have enough cattle to do to go back and hit it a second time? But try to get just far enough ahead of me with a high stock density graze where I know that I'm right at that soil temperature where my warm season annuals will be ready to germinate. Hit that grazing event almost a little heavier. In other words, higher stock densities. I may have to move them multiple times a day, but try to move multiple times a day. And as soon as I've got enough to area so that I can begin to plant within about 3 days, then I'm going to probably try to plant with 3 days worth of grazing right behind the cattle as quickly as I can. Now, we've had pretty good luck if we don't have a whole lot of wheat pasture up above us, where we can go in there and let it grow up. So you've got one grazing and it's regrown a little bit. It's trying to make that seed head, but it's relatively thin. The other thing you can do is plant right into it while you still got the plant standing upright, because the drills go through it a whole lot easier. Graze through it right immediately in front of the cattle, and then graze it down, and then you get a lot more, not only seed soil contact because of the trampling effect on that, but you also can lay more of that forage down to where it actually holds moisture behind it. And those new plants, you will come up right through it. So you've got to kind of figure out what's going to work best. It's sort of tricky when you're going to use herd impact only, and to say that you get by across your whole pasture doing that, maybe not. But I would try multiple stock densities, multiple grazing effects, and you may still get to a point where I'm going to have to come back in here and do something, either to the point where if I don't have enough cattle, I may have to mow it off, bale it off, and I hate to use that word, but you may have to remove it. But there's nothing wrong to have excess forage in order to either plant into or have to burn it down a little once in a while. You just don't want to have to do the same routine year in and year out.
I'm amazed. We haven't even got close to stumping you yet. So we'll keep going here too. And this producer said, in my area of Western Oklahoma, I only have rangeland with big 4 grasses. I don't feed hay, but I use stockpile. So he's not capable of 1 hour grazing of crops. Yep. And he asked, what do you suggest in his region or area?
Yeah, he's one of those blessed people that's got the big 4. So he's already way ahead. Yeah. And that's part of the question you've got to ask yourself when you really begin to look at the higher stock densities, when you're probably at high successional plants or kind of climax community in that part of the world. What are you trying to attain? You can be more efficient, but you may not increase your composition. You may not improve your biological composition. So if you go in there and you try to use a little higher stock density grazing, you may not be able to get it down to where you're moving daily or even once or twice a week. But the closest you can get to it, to where you can manage those units to where they get full recovery, that's what you're doing about as much as you can, but you're not going to improve on the efficiencies until you're able to move those livestock, once or once a day or once every other day. That's when you begin to improve on the efficiency and could increase your carrying capacity because you're utilizing more of the grass. So, it's not it's not to say that this type of management is going to fit everyone, but if you've already got the big four and you can maintain that over a long period of time, then it's just a matter of how can you practically apply more of the grazing management strategies to fit your situation, and realize it's one size doesn't fit everyone.
We kind of a follow-up question to a comment you made here too, and why is it important to change the way you graze a certain pasture each year?
We've had that question quite a bit. Is that we kind of like to the extent possible we like to fall into a routine because it's easy to remember. What we've tried to do is, if we're grazing differently in our grazing strategies across seasons and across years, what we do is we challenge those plants within those areas so that you're not shifting a plant composition all into one direction, so that if something goes wrong, you've got you lack the resilience and diversity within those plant communities. So if we're grazing at different times of the year, we also end up pulsing our nutrients, because every time we graze a plant, we're also sending signals to the plant that they're going to release nutrients or carbohydrates back into the soils. They're signaling the biology in the soil as well. So we begin to get a little different microbes, fungal and bacterial components, protozoa beginning to work together. And we want that synergistic relationship, but we want to have as much diversity as possible. And if we do the same thing all the time, we just begin to narrow the spectrum of microbes within the soil, kind of like having a monoculture. We don't want to have a monoculture, but we'll shift. If we use the same routine, we're going to shift our plant composition to be something more similar within that pasture, instead of having as much diversity as you probably have the potential to acquire. So it's sort of like going to work out. And you can tell I don't work out much anymore. But if for someone that works out, they don't use the same routine. An athlete won't do that. What do? They change it up. Sometimes they're going to be working on speed, sometimes agility, sometimes it's going to be just strength. It's the same thing with our pastures. We're trying to build resiliency over time, and that's one way to do it, is change the seasons of grazing across the years.
Well, as I get older, your explanation of the difference between what rest and resiliency struck home with me pretty good.
So, I like to rest.
Yeah, I do too. I'm not near as resilient as I used to be.
Oh, no.
The next question here too, I think is really a good one. It's kind of, what are some common mistakes people make when trying to incorporate a rotational grazing system?
Yes, sir. Common mistakes. Well, the first one, they want to put it on the calendar. Just like I said, we like to try to move daily. Well, that's a mistake if I do it daily every time all year long, following the same sequence. I showed on that coffee ranch, one of the things we try to do is graze in different directions. Try not to fit the same routine across the same areas every year. So change up your pattern. So instead of having permanent fences, another opportunity is minimize the number of permanent electric fences, for example, and then use more temporary fences to fit your needs over time. So don't put in your permanent fences too early. Figure out what you really want before you get started. The other thing is making sure that you have enough water. You start putting all these cattle together, you've got to make sure you got enough recharge and that you have enough volume even when the water goes down. So what's your kind of your backup plan? Not having a contingency plan. That's it. When things go wrong, what are you going to do? Always know what your out is. Some of the other things is trying to do too much too early. You don't have to start with your whole property. Start with what you can do well, and that's why I start this. That safe to learn approach. That's really important, is to expand at the rate that you can, and you may not be able to jump to a high stock density right away or the higher stock densities. Start with a good rest rotation, making sure that you're observing what you need to observe within the regrowth of the plants. Another one of the keys is when these plants begin to mature, those oldest leaves are going to begin to turn brown on the tips. What's the stage of condition that these cattle are actually grazing the plant? So kind of keep it'd be better if you kind of kept a log as to, what's the stage that you came into, and you graze them as you go. So not taking enough observations and doing proper monitoring is another thing. So there's a whole list of the things that you could put in there, but those are some of the big ones.
I think that's why I really liked your safe to learn approach, because it just does seem kind of overwhelming when you're first getting started, to bite it all off at one time.
Now I've had a lot of people, call up and say, well, where do you start? I've got this whole place. Well, that's a problem, is that, you have this paralysis because you just don't know where to start. Well, start where you've got good water, good forages, and some place that it's really easy for you to monitor. That's where you start. And then when you get through that little area, you go out to the rest of them, you're okay till you come back.
And still have another question here for you too. Will cattle generally choose hay or grass if they have the choice?
Over what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It got to be really good hay.
Yeah, it have to be really good. It all depends on what they have on offer. What's their preference? We've had stalker cattle come in here that didn't know what hay was because they never eaten it. So sometimes cattle, if they've never been on hay, they're probably just fine. It's part of what we learn to eat, and I think that's what we see with cattle. Cattle as a whole would rather have they'd rather graze a wide green leaf plant than they would a little short thin one. So it's all sort of relative to what's currently available and the quality of forage at any given time. But typically, cattle like grass. Looking at the other small ruminants, sheep like forbs. That'd be their preferred forage, and goats like browse. Now they'll eat all of it, but it's just different proportions.
Well, I know we probably could answer questions for a lot longer time, but I'm being told that I need to wrap it up here. So final question for you tonight is, should soil analysis be performed? And if so, how often?
Yes, sir. Soil analysis should be performed, even if it's on native range. I spent 27 years here and another 10 on a ranch, telling people if it's native range, you're not going to make any decisions from it. What you really need to do is monitor your soil health. If you look at your native range, you still want to know where you're at, and then come back over 3-5 year period and just check and monitor and see if you made any improvements. And if you're going from, let's say, a poor conditioned state or a weak state, and you're trying to move toward a higher successional state or a more productive state, you want to make sure that you're checking it about every 3 years. And on your introduced pastures, you may want to go a little bit earlier, or a little more frequently. And on your cropland, especially if you're doing a lot of the cover crops and you want to monitor the improvement, you may want to be doing that once a year, or at least every other year. And we prefer, or I prefer, using the Haney test to look at the full nutrient profile. And then there are other tests that you can use as well. So when you get started, the first thing is to start by taking a sample correctly and submit it to an appropriate lab, and then have a discussion with someone that's knowledgeable of what they're really looking at.
Excellent. I just want to thank you again, Hugh, for a tremendous presentation. I really mean that. I think everyone that had the opportunity got a wealth of information tonight. And on behalf of the American Angus Association and all the staff, we wanted to thank you for joining the Angus University webinar this evening.